The boot connected with her ribs in front of 200 soldiers. Laughter erupted across the training ground. But when she stood up, something in her eyes made the laughter die. What they didn't know was that this wasn't just another recruit being hazed. This was the daughter of the man who built this base. And she had been hiding in plain sight for 6 months, waiting for this exact moment. Asterisk. Hey, real quick, comment your city below. I'm always amazed by how many places these stories reach. And if you're into true stories with real emotion, make sure you're subscribed. Asterisk Sergeant Derek Mason had a reputation. In 5 years at Fort Davidson Military Base, he had broken 37 recruits. Made them quit. Made them cry. Made them realize they didn't belong in his army. Today, he had his sights set on number 30-8. Her name was Riley Cooper. 22 years old. 5'6". 130 pounds. She had joined the base 6 months ago, and from day one, Mason knew she was different. Not because she was weak, but because she was too quiet, too watchful. Like she was studying everything and everyone. Mason hated that. It was 0600 on a Tuesday morning. The entire Charlie company stood in formation on the training ground. Morning drills. Standard protocol. But Mason had planned something special. Cooper. His voice cut through the crisp morning air like a blade. Front and center. Riley stepped forward. Her face was calm, unreadable. That only made Mason angrier. You think you belong here, Cooper? Mason circled her slowly, like a predator. You think you can stand shoulder to shoulder with real soldiers? Yes, Sergeant, Riley replied. Her voice was steady. I disagree. Mason stopped directly in front of her. I think you're weak. I think you're a liability. And I think it's time someone showed you the door. What happened next happened fast. Mason's boot drove into Riley's ribs with brutal force. The impact echoed across the silent training ground. Riley went down hard, gasping for air. 200 soldiers watched in stunned silence. Some wanted to help. Most were too afraid of Mason to move. Riley lay on the ground, clutching her side. Mason stood over her, a cruel smile on his face. Stay down, Cooper, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. It's over. But Riley didn't stay down. She placed her palms flat on the ground. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up, first to her knees, then to her feet. When she stood, something had changed in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. Permission to speak, Sergeant, Riley said. Mason laughed. Denied. Get back in formation before My name isn't Cooper, Riley interrupted. The training ground went dead silent. Mason's face darkened. What did you just say to me? Riley straightened her shoulders. My name is Riley Davidson, daughter of Colonel Marcus Davidson, the man who built this base 20 years ago. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Mason's smile faltered. You're lying. Am I? Riley pulled something from her pocket. A military ID. She held it up for everyone to see. I've been undercover here for 6 months, observing, documenting, reporting directly to General Hawthorne about corruption, hazing, and abuse of power. Mason's face went white. And Sergeant Mason, Riley continued, her voice now ice cold, you just assaulted the colonel's daughter in front of 200 witnesses. How do you think this is going to end for you? 3 hours later, Sergeant Derek Mason sat in a small interrogation room in the base's administration building. His hands were cuffed to the table. His career was over. He knew it. But what he didn't know was that Riley's story was only half true. In another room across the hall, Riley sat with General Patricia Hawthorne, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. You did well, Hawthorne said. Mason is finished. We have him on assault, conduct unbecoming, and about a dozen other charges. Riley nodded, but her expression was troubled. There's something else you need to know, General. Hawthorne leaned forward. I'm listening. Riley took a deep breath. Mason wasn't just hazing me. He was testing me. Someone told him who I really was 3 weeks ago. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. Explain. I found a note in my locker, Riley said. It said, "We know who you are, Davidson. Run while you can." I thought it was just intimidation, but then Mason started escalating. The kick this morning? That was supposed to provoke me into revealing myself. Who sent the note? Hawthorne demanded. I don't know, Riley admitted. But someone on this base has been leaking classified information. Someone knew about my undercover operation. And I think Mason was being used as a pawn. Hawthorne stood abruptly. This changes everything. If there's a mole, there's more, Riley interrupted. My father, Colonel Davidson, he didn't just build this base. He buried something here. Something dangerous. And I think someone is trying to find it. Fort Davidson Military Base was built in 2003 on the site of an old Cold War facility. Most people assumed the original structures had been demolished. They were wrong. That night, Riley broke protocol. She left her barracks after lights out and made her way to the oldest section of the base, a condemned area near the eastern perimeter. The sign said, "Structural hazard, keep out." But Riley had spent months studying her father's old construction. Blueprints thought she knew what was really down there. Using a flashlight, Riley descended a rusted stairwell that led deep underground. The air grew cold and stale. The walls were covered in decades of dust and decay dot at the bottom. She found a steel door, locked, but Riley had come prepared. She pulled out a key her father had given her years ago, just before he died. He had made her promise never to use it unless absolutely necessary. If you ever need the truth, her father had said on his deathbed, go to Fort Davidson. Go to the place where it all began. But be careful, Riley. Some secrets are buried for a reason. The key turned. The door opened. Inside was a small room, cold, clinical, and in the center, a single filing cabinet. Riley opened it. Inside were dozens of files. Documents marked top secret, photographs, audio recordings, and one name that appeared over and over again. Project Shadowfall. Riley's blood ran cold as she read. Project Shadowfall had been a covert operation in the 1980s. Government had been experimenting with psychological warfare techniques, mind control, behavioral modification. They had used soldiers as test subjects without their knowledge or consent. Her father had discovered it, and instead of exposing it, he had been ordered to bury it, to build Fort Davidson on top of the old facility and make sure no one ever found out what had happened. But someone had found out, and they wanted these files. Riley grabbed as many documents as she could. Carrie turned to leave. That's when she heard the footsteps. Riley spun around. A figure emerged from the shadows at the top of the stairwell. At first, she couldn't make out who it was. Then the person stepped into the light. It was Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Riley's bunkmate. Her friend. Sarah? Riley's voice was filled with confusion. What are you doing here? Sarah smiled, but it wasn't friendly. I'm sorry, Riley, I really am. But you should have stayed out of this. Riley's mind raced. It was you. You're the mole. Mole is such an ugly word, Sarah said, descending the stairs slowly. I prefer entrepreneur. Do you have any idea how much these files are worth? There are people who would pay millions to get their hands on Project Shadowfall. Governments, corporations, people who want to weaponize what your father tried to hide. My father protected those victims, Riley said, her voice shaking with anger. He made sure this never happened again. Your father was a coward, Sarah shot back. He could have exposed it, could have brought down everyone involved. Instead, he buried it and went on with his career. Well, I'm not a coward, Riley. I'm going to get rich. And you're not going to stop me. Sarah pulled out a gun. Riley's training kicked in. She dove to the side as Sarah fired. The bullet ricocheted off the steel door. Riley scrambled behind the filing cabinet, her heart pounding. You can't run forever, Sarah shouted, advancing, but Riley wasn't running. She was thinking. Sarah had made one critical mistake. She had assumed Riley was just the colonel's daughter, just another soldier. What Sarah didn't know was that Riley had been more than undercover. She had been training, preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Riley grabbed one of the metal drawers and yanked it free. As Sarah rounded the corner, Riley hurled it with all her strength. It hit Sarah square in the chest, knocking her backward. The gun clattered to the floor. Riley lunged. The two women fought viciously in the cramped underground room. Punches, kicks, desperate grappling. But Riley had something Sarah did in single quotes T.purpose. With a final surge of strength, Riley pinned Sarah to the ground and struck her hard across the jaw. Sarah went limp. Riley grabbed the gun, secured Sarah's hands with zip ties from her pocket, and called for backup. Two weeks later, Riley stood in General Hawthorne's office. Sarah Chun was in military prison awaiting court-martial. Sergeant Mason had been dishonorably discharged. Project Shadowfall had been exposed to the proper authorities, and a full investigation was underway. Justice had been served. Or so Riley thought. "There's something you need to see," Hawthorne said. Sliding a folder across the desk. Riley opened it. Inside was a photograph, an old one, faded and yellowed with age. It showed a group of young soldiers in the 1980s, and in the center of the group, smiling at the camera, was someone Riley recognized. Her father. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, arm around his shoulder, was a young woman. The name beneath the photo read, Lieutenant Patricia Hawthorne. Riley looked up slowly. "You knew my father." Hawthorne's expression was unreadable. "I was part of Project Shadowfall, Riley, one of the test subjects. Your father saved me, pulled me out before they broke me completely. He's the reason I'm still here, the reason I became a general. I owed him everything." Riley's hands trembled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know if you were like him," Hawthorne said quietly. "If you had his integrity, his courage. When you came here undercover, I knew what you were really looking for. And I had to know if you'd do the right thing when you found it." "And?" Riley asked. Hawthorne smiled. "You did. Just like your father. Which is why I'm offering you a choice, Riley. You can leave the military, go back to civilian life, or you can stay. Work with me. Help me root out the corruption that still exists in places like this. Continue your father's work." Riley looked at the photograph again, at her father's young face, at the determination in his eyes. She thought about the kick, the pain, the humiliation, and how all of it had led her here, to this moment, to this choice. "I'll stay," Riley said. Hawthorne nodded. "Good, because there's something else you should know. Sarah Chun wasn't working alone. She had a partner, someone higher up the chain of command, someone we haven't identified yet." Riley's eyes hardened. "Then we find them." "We will," Hawthorne promised. "But Riley, be careful. Whoever they are, they're dangerous. They've been hiding in plain sight for years, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets too close." Riley stood, shoulders squared. "Let them try. I'm my father's daughter, and I don't back down." As Riley left the office, she touched her ribs where Mason's kick had landed. The bruise was still there, a reminder. Some people kick you down to keep you in your place. But the strong ones? They get back up. They fight back. And they change everything. Riley Davidson wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a weapon, forged in pain, tempered by betrayal, and aimed directly at the heart of corruption. And somewhere in the shadows, the real enemy was watching, waiting, planning their next move. But so was Riley. The war had just begun. 3 months later, a new recruit arrived at Fort Davidson. His name was Marcus Webb, 24 years old, quiet, watchful, too perfect. Riley noticed him immediately. During morning drills, Webb glanced at her just once. And in that glance, Riley saw something that made her blood run cold. Recognition. That night, Riley found a note in her locker. The handwriting was different from before, but the message was chillingly familiar. We know who you are, Davidson, and we know what you're planning. This time, you won't see us coming. Riley crumpled the note in her fist. Her jaw set with determination. They wanted a war? They were going to get one, because Riley Davidson had learned something important. Sometimes the people who kick you aren't your real enemies. They're just distractions. Pawns in a much larger game. And the real enemies? They're the ones who stand in the shadows and pull the strings. But Riley was done being anyone's puppet. She was the colonel's daughter. The soldier who refused to stay down. The woman who had stared into the darkness and refused to blink. And she was coming for them. All. One by one. Until every last secret was exposed. Until every last corrupt officer was brought to justice. Until the legacy her father had tried to protect was finally, truly safe. The kick that was supposed to humiliate her had done the opposite. It had awakened something fierce and unbreakable inside her. And Fort Davidson would never be the same again. Asterisk. That's the end of today's story, but I hope it stays with you for a while. If something in it spoke to you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share your thoughts. It's your comments that keep me inspired to make the next one.